Hi, my name is Ethan, and today I'm going to be talking about amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. Amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, or ALS, is a disease that slowly destroys the nerve cells that allow us to move. These nerve cells are called motor neurons, and they act like electrical wires running from your brain to your muscles. Anytime you walk, talk, smile, or lift your hand, a motor neuron carries that message. ALS gradually kills these neurons, which is why people with the disease lose the ability to control their muscles. To understand why this happens, we first need to understand how motor neurons normally communicate. Motor neurons send messages using a process called signal transduction. This simply means turning one type of signal into another. When a motor neuron wants to send a message, it first creates an electrical signal. But neurons don't actually touch each other. There's a tiny gap between them called the synapse. To cross that gap, the neuron must switch from an electrical signal to a chemical one. It does this by releasing a ligand, which is the scientific word for a chemical messenger. In the motor system, the main ligand is glutamate, a substance made and released by motor neurons in the brain and spinal cord. When an electrical signal reaches the end of the neuron, glutamate is released into the synapse and floats across a tiny gap to the next cell. On the receiving cell, whether another neuron or muscle, there are receptors, which are proteins that detect and respond to glutamate. The two main receptors involved here are called AMPA receptors and NMDA receptors. These receptors act like doors that open when glutamate binds to them. When they open, they allow tiny charged particles called ions to flow into the cell. AMPA receptors let in sodium ions, which help the cell generate its own electrical signal. NMDA receptors let in sodium and calcium ions, but only under certain conditions. These receptors are normally blocked by a magnesium ion, which pops out only when the cell is already partially activated. This double-check system prevents the cell from being overstimulated. Now we move on to the next part of the pathway. Once calcium enters through the NMDA receptor, it acts as a second messenger, meaning it triggers reactions inside the cell. Calcium activates several proteins, including enzymes called CAMK2 and protein kinase C, which help regulate the cell's behavior. These enzymes can turn other proteins on or off, change how sensitive the cell is to signals, and even affect which genes inside the cell get used. More pathways involving molecules like cyclic AMP and protein kinase A can also be activated. Together, these signaling events control both the immediate response, continuing the electrical signal or causing a muscle to contract, and long-term changes such as strengthening synapses or helping neurons stay healthy. In a healthy system, all of this happens quickly and smoothly. Glutamate is released, receptors activate, ions flow, a new signal is generated, and then the process shuts off. The shutdown step is extremely important. After glutamate has delivered its message, it must be removed from the synapse so the neuron doesn't get overstimulated. This cleanup job is handled mainly by astrocytes, which are support cells in the nervous system. Astrocytes use special transporter proteins called EAAT2 to vacuum up extra glutamate and recycle it safely. But in ALS, this cleanup system breaks down. The EAAT2 transporters don't work properly, or there aren't enough of them. As a result, glutamate stays in the synapse for far too long. With too much glutamate around, the AMPA and especially the NMDA receptors stay open longer than they should. This allows huge amounts of calcium to flood into the motor neuron. And while controlled levels of calcium act as helpful messengers, excessive calcium becomes toxic. The overloaded calcium triggers destructive enzymes, damages the cell's energy-producing structures called mitochondria, and leads to the buildup of harmful molecules called reactive oxygen species, which causes oxidative stress. Over time, these stresses overwhelm the neuron, leading to its death. As more and more motor neurons die, the muscles they control lose their input. This causes weakness, twitching, and eventually paralysis. When the neurons that control breathing fail, the disease becomes life-threatening. So the progression of ALS, from cellular breakdown to full-body symptoms, can largely be traced back to a single disrupted pathway, the glutamate signal transduction system. When glutamate isn't properly cleared, the resulting overstimulation creates a chain reaction that damages and eventually destroys motor neurons. Understanding this pathway is essential because it reveals where potential treatments could repair the process and protect motor neurons. I hope you enjoyed my video and learned something about ALS. Thank you for watching.